it's time to look at my overall reading for 2024, some stats and plans for 2025. So looking at my reading for 2024, I hit my goal of reading 100 books. I actually read 141 books. And with those, when I look at the lists, I think it's really nice. I like the cover spread on Storygraph and Goodreads with the covers that I read, the books that I read. I am happy with the amount of books I read, but I also am aware that it was a lot of escapism. Looking at my reading, it tells a lot about last year. Yes, I read 141 books. Of those, half probably were fantasy and a lot more were science fiction. So I didn't really read literary fiction much last year because that's a different skill set I need, or a brain space that I need to read it. And I also didn't enjoy it as much. So I was looking for stories that took me out of reality, that took me away and captured me. I was looking more for plot-driven stories than character-driven stories. And I was more, it was about people and the characters, but it wasn't diving into them growing that much. It wasn't diving into them having hardships and experiences. I really wasn't looking for that. Nothing wrong with that. It just shows in my reading. I also went and revisited a lot of stories. So that also says about the comfort of the old, revisiting things that I know, and it's a safety. There's no, I always call it anticipation anxiety. It's that feeling where you know some dramatic plot point is going to happen, something that is going to be emotionally challenging or in another way challenging. And sometimes I don't like that and I don't want to have that. So with rereads, I know what's going to happen. So even if there is a dramatic plot point coming, I'm aware of it and I know that it will end well and I know how bad it's going to be because my imagination always amplifies everything. So I imagine something much worse than is usually happening. So let's look at some numbers and graphs and stats and all the nice things. Like I said, I read 141 books in total. I'm going to look down a little bit for stats. Of those were 29 physical books, 37 ebooks, and 75 audiobooks. So 50-50 split between listening and reading, approximately. And I enjoy that. I do listen to a lot of audiobooks, and I noticed that I listened to many short audiobooks this year. Now, looking at the lengths, that is one of the goals I had. I wanted to read longer books, and when it comes to the average length of a book, it was 277 pages, a little bit higher than the 246 pages I read in 2023. Listening on audiobooks, I didn't do well. Like I said, I listened to a lot of shorter books. I averaged per book about 486 minutes compared to the 588 I had last year. That's not good. I looked at the audiobook lengths particularly for the books, and I noticed that 25 of those were over 600 minutes, so 10 hours. And I had that in mind, that I read a lot of longer books, but I forgot apparently that I read approximately 30 books that were 5 hours or less. And that is something I've noticed before, that the 5 hour, 300 minutes is a decision for me when I look for a quick read, because I can listen to those in one go on a long run, on a long walk, or maybe if I have a day trip, something where I'm going, I can do 5 hours in one sitting. But everything that's longer than 10 hours, I'm usually like, oh, so much time with that story. It's not that the stories are bad, but sometimes I get impatient. And that's something I really noticed last year, that the longer the book, the more tired I got with it. Nothing about the book. It was just me making the book bad because I spent too much time with it. So I hope to change that this year again, but that's definitely the reason why my audiobook length has decreased so much last year. Then again, the total of pages is with 19,420 for all the books. Not bad. It averages about 1,600 pages per month. Granted, I had good and bad months, but I usually think when I read 1,000 pages in a month, I had a good reading month, meaning that I'm happy with the time I spent reading. On audio, I listen to 38,523 minutes, which averages about 3,210 minutes per month, which is higher than I usually aim for. I'm happy with 2,000 minutes per month. Granted, I listen to almost everything on higher speed. My usually go-to is by 1.5, but the longer a book is, the faster I can go. And some authors, or not authors, narrators, I better understand when they're slower. There's also the difference between listening on German or English, because I tend to speed up German books more than I do English books, or I can listen to them faster than I can do English books. But I only listened to one extremely long book that I was bored by at the end. Let's talk a little bit about authors before we move on to some other stats. I don't particularly track a lot about the authors. I like to look at the amount of authors I read, because since I'm reading quite a lot of fantasy and series books, I have repeat authors. So the 141 books were by 88 authors only. And then another thing I started tracking last year was looking at new authors to me. So of those 88 authors, 56 were new to me. So I explored a lot of new voices last year, which I think is really nice. So not only backlist books, but also new people. Very good. Okay, more stats. One of my goals, or a few other goals I made, were reading more wishlist books, but I didn't track that. So cannot say anything about that. If I did that or didn't do that, no clue. I also set out to have like 20% for the things I'm tracking, and I didn't do well at that. I did read that one German book, but that was it. And I'm very far away from 20% there. When it comes to nonfiction, I read 10 nonfiction books. That's just 70% of my overall reading last year. Not happy with that, I have to admit that. Translations, I'm much better with 39 books. That was 27%. But then again, modern classics or classics, I only read 15. That was barely 10%. Rereads, I mentioned that before. I reread 33 books. That's 23% of my reading. Another thing I will stop tracking is sequels. I read 56 sequels, which is 40% of my reading. But with all the rereading, a lot of sequels were there that were not new sequels. So I started tracking sequels to see if I'm working on ongoing series that I'm reading. But since I'm not doing that at the moment, that doesn't really have any information anymore, but I still wanted to tell you. And I apparently started 19 new series last year. I'm not sure how many of those are finished. That's something I'm going to change about my tracking this year. Then I'm also going to stop tracking if a book is LGBTQIA+ or something, because 63 books or 44% of my reading could be counted into that category. So I am pretty sure that I could manage an amount of books that have queer content or queer characters on my own without tracking. I'm going to see how it is when I'm not paying attention to that. Maybe it changes and I start tracking that again. But for now, I'm completely content with that content. Okay, and the last goals I set myself were finishing series. Among of those was my Discworld reread. We should not talk about that, because I did not do that. I read one of the 6 books I had left. I did much better on the Mistborn books. I wanted to read more Brandon Sanderson and finish the Mistborn series, and I did that. So at least something was achieved. I did not pick up the Tinkered Starsong, book 2 and 3 that I'm still missing by Gail Carriger, so that's moving on to 2025 as well. Before we move on to 2025, I noticed that I'm not tracking the things I want to track. So I had used the same or adapted version of a spreadsheet tracking my reading for quite a while now, and because last year was mostly exhaustion based, I didn't really add anything. I didn't set out to have major goals, and I didn't do any challenges, and so I didn't really change anything. But I noticed that things I would like to know about my reading, I wasn't tracking. So I'm changing that up for 2025. And first of all, my overall reading goal will be 100 books again. I will be happy if I reach that, and I will be even more happy if I exceed that, but who knows if that's going to happen. I will also try to read longer books again to see if I can extend the average minute count per audiobook, which will probably be working because I'm planning to listen to all of the Stormlight Archives books, and they're 40 hours plus. But it's also about the amount of minutes I listen to in a month. So who knows if that's going to happen? It's a challenge. I mentioned before that I want to stop tracking queer books, but I want to continue tracking translations I read in a year, classics or modern classics, as well as nonfiction. I will not be tracking German books next year because it's honestly just depressing how few German books I'm reading, and I'm not particularly aiming for that at the moment, so not tracking that. What I want to diversify is my series tracking. I want to track when a first book of a series, I want to track a last book of a series, and I want to track separately books that are part of a series so that I have more information about how many series I started and how many of those I actually finished. And I'm not quite sure yet if I want to only do that for new series or also for rereads. I probably should count out rereads and just count them as series books, but since they are not new ones, I'll have to think about that more. That's my main problem usually. I can't make decisions on what to track and how to track. That's why I always make a mess of it. But I want to see how much of my reading is actually in series and moving me forwards on the series that I'm reading. And I also added a wishlist tracker and a TBR tracker. Now, I've always had my TBR in my spreadsheet, but I didn't track the books after I transferred them to the active reading if they were from the TBR or not. So I want to change my TBR tracking to see how many books from my TBR, meaning books that I bought and put in a pile or somewhere to read later. Not books that I buy to read immediately, but books that I buy and don't start immediately. Those will be counted as a TBR read, and I want to track that. Additionally, I want to track the wishlist books. I have wishlists on varying platforms for varying formats, and it's a mess. And I just keep adding things, and I usually tend to go back to the later added books than the ones that have been there for ages. So I want to keep track this year of how often I actually read a book from my wish list to see if that is actually making sense to do that and continue that, or if I have to maybe cull my wish list. We'll see. After Q1, we'll have some data to talk about there. And that brings me to books I actually want to read next year. And there is going to be a focus on 3 series for the beginning of the year. I already mentioned that I want to read the Stormlight Archive books. These are more books by Brandon Sanderson and part of the Cosmere. I do want to read the Cosmere books that are out now and catch up on that. So let's see how that is going to work out. Those are new books, and last year I enjoyed reading the Cosmere books, so hopefully the motivation will kick me into finishing a lot of them before I run out of enthusiasm. I also finally want to get serious about finishing my Discworld rereads. There are 5 books left now, so if I get to it and pay attention to that goal, maybe I'll manage this year. And I also started a new series last month, The Husky and His White Cat Chizen, which will be 9 books out by the summer. And I do want to track that, but I don't put that off too much. So those are the 3 series I'm going to focus on definitely for Q1 and see how far I got. I think that's enough goals for the beginning of the year. I don't want to really go into challenges or make myself aim for more difficult books, more literary books at the moment, because my brain space is still not where I would like it to be. So a lot of fantasy and science fiction will probably be part of 2025 reading as well, but I don't mind. So what do I aim for? 100 books, finish some series, track wishlist and TBR books, and 20% other tracking things. That doesn't sound so... it sounds not doable. Let's be real. It's a challenge. But I am motivated and I hope to do a lot, and I hope to keep you informed as the year goes on. So let me know in comments, how was your 2024 reading? Did you achieve what you set out to? Did you have a goal that you completely forgot about, like I did about the Read Good Challenge, Read Good Books Challenge? Somewhere in the year I forgot that I was doing that. And yeah, let me know in comments how you did. And what's your goal for 2025? Do you have a book goal, a page goal, some project you're trying? Let's talk in comments. Thank you for watching. Bye bye. This is very hard today. Yes.